On the morning of November 29, 1970, hikers discovered a charred, grotesque body in the steep, peat-stained ravine of Isdalen, a wooded valley above Bergen, Norway. That corpse would become known as the Isdal Woman. The body lay half-burned among blackened ferns and scorched earth. Her clothing was singed and most garment labels had been deliberately removed. Bergen police quickly sealed the glade and recovered an array of baffling items. Several sets of clothing with labels torn out, wigs, bottles of sleeping tablets, a plastic comb, and a small notebook filled with cryptic entries and numbers investigators later described as coded notes. Officers also found multiple travel documents and passports that appeared forged or altered, listing different names, nationalities, and birth dates. Investigators cataloged conflicting clues that looked like an attempt to erase identity, staged against an era of rising geopolitical paranoia. Norway was a NATO country on the edge of Cold War Europe. 1970 sat between the fallout of the Prague Spring and a period of proxy tensions, and the discovery immediately sparked speculation about espionage, foreign agents, and clandestine tradecraft. The Bergen investigation, led by local police with support from national authorities, was methodical but baffled. Fingerprints and dental records yielded no matches in Norwegian databases. Clothing manufacturers' marks had been removed. The pockets held receipts and train tickets that traced back to hotel rooms in Bergen and travel across Western Europe. Newspapers across Norway and the Scandinavian press seized the story, printing grainy photographs and mapping a macabre itinerary through Freiburg, Amsterdam, and toward the Belgian border. Those details stretched the mystery far beyond a single mountain slope. Her identity was never confirmed. In Norway, she was dubbed Isdalskvinnen, the Isdal Woman, and her unresolved fate became a national obsession. The mixture of grotesque physical damage, deliberate erasure of identity, coded notes, and suspicious travel papers turned a local death into a Cold War cipher, one that haunted investigators and the public for decades. What followed were meticulous interviews, international file checks, and decades of rumor and forensic dead ends that never produced a clear identity. The case remains one of Norway's most unsettling mysteries. From the moment Bergen police cordoned off the blackened slope in Isdalen on November 29, 1970, the scene read like a forensic thriller stripped of comfort. Officers photographed the scorched ground, lifted brittle fabric, and collected items that refused to explain themselves. The site was processed with basic forensic routines and military precision. Clothing and boots were bagged, wigs and a plastic comb were inventoried, bottles of sedative tablets were sealed as exhibits, and a small handwritten notebook with strange entries and numbers was cataloged for closer study. A preliminary autopsy at Haukeland Hospital the next day confirmed a body so thermally destroyed that facial features were almost obliterated and fingertips were deliberately damaged or missing, making visual ID impossible. The pathologist reported extensive burning to the torso and extremities and noted a crucial, unsettling detail. The lungs contained no significant soot. That suggested she had not been burning while breathing smoke at the scene. Toxicology and the pill bottles pointed to sedatives in her system, but coroners could not declare a clear cause of death. The official determination remained inconclusive. Fingerprints and dental comparisons sent to nationwide registries returned no matches. Mystery hardened into intent when investigators found multiple garments with labels excised, shoes from different manufacturers, and wigs that implied deliberate disguise. Her pockets yielded a scatter of receipts, train tickets, and travel stubs that sketched a tangled, transient route. Hotel stays in Bergen, train rides through Western Europe, and crossings toward Freiburg, Amsterdam, and the Belgian border. Hotel registers gave witness statements. Clerks and chambermaids described a woman in her 30s, fluent in several languages, paying cash and arriving or leaving at odd hours, sometimes with a companion, more often alone. At one Bergen pension, staff remembered her requesting a room with separate keys and insisting on privacy. At another, a receptionist noted she used different names and dates of birth across stays. Passport fragments and travel documents recovered at the scene and in police files bore a patchwork of identities and birth dates. Some passports had stamps matching multiple Western European entries, but also showed signs of alteration and forgery. Investigators from Bergen Police and the National Crime Unit Krippos widened the inquiry, running fingerprint checks, comparing dental records across Europe, and sending inquiries to Interpol. Each lead folded back into uncertainty. Early hypotheses circulated quickly. Suicide by self-immolation seemed possible given the sedatives and the burned state. Homicide could explain soot-free lungs if the body had been moved and burned later. And against the Cold War backdrop of NATO Norway in 1970, espionage became an unavoidable corrosive theory because of the deliberate erasure of identity, coded notes, and forged papers. As officers chased hotel logs, train manifests, and fragmentary eyewitness accounts, the case hardened into a question of movement and motive. The investigation set a taut trajectory toward deeper international records and one stubborn question that would drive the next phase. Who had she been when she boarded those trains, and why had someone tried so deliberately to make her disappear? Investigators pushed the Isdal Woman out of Bergen and into Europe. Following a jagged trail of passport stamps, hotel registers, and train receipts that ran from Bergen to Freiburg, Amsterdam, and the Belgian border. Bergen police and Krippos sent formal requests to German, Dutch, and Belgian authorities and to Interpol. Reporters from Bergen's Tidende and Aftenposten began combing continental records and interviewing reclusive hotel clerks. The battered notebook recovered from the slope, a palm-sized ledger of numbers and clipped words, was sent to handwriting experts and cryptographers. They treated the scrawl as a cipher rather than a diary. Columns of 2- and 3-digit numbers were theorized to be coded telephone numbers, room numbers, or rendezvous coordinates, but no single key unlocked meaning. At police stations in Freiburg and Amsterdam, clerks turned up hotel registrations that matched dates on the Isdal receipts but listed different names. A Lise here, a Frau X there. All were paid in cash, and guests insisted on anonymity. Border officials produced stamped passports that had been clearly tampered with. Lamination peeled, pages trimmed, visas smudged, and in some cases the same passport number appeared under different names. Each new file widened the map of movement while tightening the knot of deception. Forensic work added uglier, more stubborn details. The pathologist's notes from Haukeland Hospital recorded not just extensive burning, but deliberate concealment. Most garment labels had been surgically removed, some clothing appeared to have been changed on the body, and personal items were an organized jumble: wigs, a plastic comb, and bottles of sleeping tablets. Toxicology showed significant sedatives in her bloodstream. Dental examinations revealed distinctive work, fillings and restorations that did not match Norwegian dental registries, so Krippos circulated dental charts to clinics across Europe. Exchanges in 1971 with dentists in Germany and Belgium produced frustrating mismatches and long silences. Fingerprints, already mutilated at the fingertips, returned no matches. Hair analysis confirmed multiple treatments and at least 2 wigs found at the scene, pointing to deliberate disguise and prolonged travel under different guises. Perhaps most grotesque and telling was the soot paradox. Her lungs contained little to no smoke residue, a clinical hint that the burning occurred post-mortem or after she had been incapacitated and moved. Combined with sedatives in her system, this suggested a staged immolation rather than suicide. Journalists began compiling timelines and publishing grainy photographs of passport fragments and the notebook's cipher, triggering anonymous tips and false leads that lured detectives down blind alleys. Each international inquiry produced paperwork but no signature of identity. Every answered question cast 3 more shadows. The case stopped being a local killing and became a cross-border mosaic of tampered documents, coded notes, and surgical erasures. Instead of resolving the mystery, the evidence only deepened it, forcing investigators to prepare for an even darker possibility as they tried to reconstruct her last days and the motives that turned a human life into a cryptic, charred cipher. For decades, the Isdal Woman existed only as brittle reports and yellowing exhibits in Bergen police files and at Kripos, the National Criminal Investigation Service. Across the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, the case faded and flared as reporters at Bergen's Tidende and Aftenposten chased leads and private researchers demanded access to the original evidence. A plastic comb, wigs, pill bottles, and a tiny cipher notebook that sat like a wound in official archives. Memories faded. Hotel clerks retired or died, train manifests were discarded, and paper records that might have named her were shredded or lost. In the early 2000s, a new generation forced a decisive turn. Police agreed to re-examine cold files, release selected photos and documents, and let modern forensic experts study the remains. For the first time since November 29, 1970, scientists applied contemporary facial reconstruction to the skull impressions and commissioned computerized renderings intended to restore a living face to the charred relic. Laboratories extracted DNA from remaining hair and bone fragments using methods unavailable in 1970. Mitochondrial testing and STR analysis were attempted where samples allowed. The results were jagged and partial. Reconstructions produced haunting, plausible faces, but none matched a confirmed identity in Interpol or national databases, and DNA profiles narrowed geographic possibilities without delivering a name. International labs reported haplogroup data and suggested regions of origin as possibilities rather than certainties. Analysts mapped patterns that fit parts of Western and Central Europe, but excluded no country outright. The notebook was rescanned and reanalyzed with digital tools. Cryptographers and amateur sleuths proposed mappings of the number columns to telephone codes and hotel room formats, but every proposed key fractured under documentary scrutiny. New public releases produced an avalanche of tips, many contradictory. A witness who had been a chambermaid in 1970 came forward in a televised interview with a nervous, trembling recollection of a woman who wore false eyelashes and paid cash, but her memory contained conflicting details about dates and companions. Hotel registers from Freiburg and Amsterdam yielded partial matches and then contradictions. Passport fragments bore forgery marks and inconsistent stamps that made a definitive travel sequence impossible to prove. The renewed investigations created a high-stakes moment. A spike in leads, modern science, and public attention converged into a genuine chance to identify the corpse found on that blackened slope. Instead, the case tightened into a crucible of diminishing returns. For every promising lead resolved, 3 new inconsistencies appeared. For every forensic advance, a crucial witness or paper record was gone. Pressure mounted to a breaking point where an answer seemed within reach. Yet despite facial reconstructions, DNA profiles, and international cooperation, the Isdal Woman remained unnamed, her true identity slipping like soot through the fingers of those who hunted the truth. Everything converged into a single terrible moment when investigators and the public were forced to weigh the evidence on its own monstrous terms. The forged passports, tampered visa stamps, and cash transfers traced through Freiburg, Amsterdam, and the Belgian border read like Cold War tradecraft. The torn garment labels, multiple wigs, and the tiny cipher notebook suggested conscious disguise and clandestine rendezvous. Those facts favor an espionage hypothesis. Irregular travel patterns, multilingual witnesses in Bergen hotel registers, and coded numeric entries that cryptographers treated as possible contact lists fit patterns taught in spycraft manuals. The medical record, however, pushed the argument in a different, bloodier direction. Haukeland Hospital's autopsy on the remains recovered November 29, 1970, recorded extensive charring, surgical removal of labels, and, most chillingly, lungs with little or no soot alongside sedatives in her bloodstream. That forensic configuration is consistent with a targeted killing staged as immolation after the victim had been incapacitated or moved, and it explains the effort to erase identity and destroy traces. A third, darker possibility remained plausible on the same evidence: a planned disappearance or staged suicide. Multiple identities, wigs, and cash could indicate someone deliberately erasing her life. The pill bottles and sedative metabolites in the toxicology reports leave open the chance she sought to vanish and was later burned to finalize that disappearance. In a televised public release of reconstructed faces, passport fragments, and DNA summaries, Bergen police and Krippos put the case back in public view. A trembling former chambermaid's testimony about a woman who paid in cash and demanded privacy made the mystery painfully human. Newspapers from Bergen's Tidende to Aftenposten printed the butchered images in the cipher pages, prompting an avalanche of tips and grief. Yet none of the evidence produced a single incontrovertible identity. The case closed not with revelation, but with an official, anguished appeal. The Isdal Woman's true name remained unconfirmed, and Norway, and still haunted by the charred slope above Bergen, was asked to hold her memory and the unsolved facts until a trace could be transformed into a name. On November 29, 1970, a soot-blackened body was found in Isdalen above Bergen. The Isdal Woman case forced Norwegian policing to reckon with a grotesque mystery that never produced a name. Bergen police and Krippos reopened files, shared fragments with Interpol, and in the 2000s applied facial reconstruction along with mitochondrial and STR DNA testing to brittle remains and hair, showing how modern forensics can peel back time yet still leave gaps. The case sharpened cross-border cooperation on cold cases and exposed limits in the archival record. Hotel registers shredded, witnesses dead, and travel manifests discarded. National newspapers from Bergen's Tidende to Aftenposten fed a ravenous public appetite for Cold War enigmas, turning evidence into spectacle and generating waves of tips, some useful and many distracting. More recently, the Isdal Woman has become a touchstone in debates over forensic genealogy, where powerful DNA tools promise names but raise real privacy and ethical questions about consent, familial exposure, and reopening wounds decades later. Re-examinations showed scientific promise but underscored responsibility. Investigators must balance the drive to identify with respect for surviving relatives and for procedural integrity. Above policy and technology sits the human cost, the brutality of a charred, mutilated body denied a recorded life, the erosion of memory as communities age, and the moral debt owed to an unnamed person. The case leaves a stark lesson. Identity is both evidence and dignity, and without a name, historical truth remains a raw, unresolved ache.